Welcome back, everyone, to our second episode in our 3-part series on stewardship in real estate development. I'm Rosie, I'm a senior associate at Mills & Reeve, and I'm joined by an expert panel today. So in the first episode, we discussed what stewardship is, and this episode will be discussing the why of stewardship. So why do we need successful stewardship strategies for real estate schemes? So the first question to kick us off is, how early in the conception of a new scheme should stewardship be a consideration? I don't know if that's a bit of a leading question, but I'll come to Anna first.
I think the earlier the better.
Yeah.
So in episode 1 we talked about stewardship being this long-term view, and for me it does go from pre-planning all the way through to post-occupancy. And I think the thing I see a lot on schemes is you would be amazed how the decision you make, even before day one of putting the spade in the ground, affects the lived experience of the people once the houses are actually built. It goes to ensuring you can make schemes viable financially, lowering this cost of a service charge, the design of places. So yeah, the earlier the better.
Francis?
I think I completely agree. Right at the outset, this needs to be part of the conversation. And I think so often we set a vision for a place and set out the values, and they need to have legs to them as well. They need to last and steer that stewardship conversation as well, and still be relevant post completion. And so that's certainly on some of the schemes that we're working on, and Hartree, just up the road in North Cambridge, is one of them. We've been looking at all of those community assets and looking at what are the different options for it, but very much guided by some of those really early values that we've set about being open to all, shaped by many key values that are coming through that take us beyond the design phase into, hopefully, down into the sort of years to come.
And Paul?
And it cuts across so many things, doesn't it? So this is about what kind of place is it going to be, and then of course fundamental to this is who's going to pay and how we're going to pay for the things that we're all interested in. And that in itself means you have to think about this at the beginning, because there are significant costs obviously associated with paying for open space or community facilities. So as a developer you'll be trying to account for those right from the start anyway. And if we don't talk about it, like Francis is saying, then we'll be making assumptions, other people will be making assumptions, and we've got to make sure that this all joins up. So right at the beginning, and then like Anna says, just throughout the whole process.
Yeah, I think there's also key to make clear, when you think about it, it is a thought process and it does evolve, and it's about engagement and listening and adapting. We've all used those kind of verbs already this morning. There's an indelible mantra that Urban&Civic have, which is flexibility, not prophecy. So just because you are considering it early doesn't mean you're being prescriptive. It doesn't mean you're imposing on a community what has to happen. It's more about the fact that you are having the conversation and you are alive to the fact that it does need to be paid for. It's a really uncomfortable thing, I think, talking about money, but it is the reality, and it is one of the things, like Sal said earlier, the cost of living crisis that does impact on that lived experience.
For me, there's something about looking through the stewardship lens, looking bottom up almost, in terms of what is this place going to feel like to live, work, play here? What do we think that looks like? And yes, that might morph and change along the way, but let's have an understanding of what that is, even from inception. And if we can verbalise that, then that helps bring existing communities with us, because if they know you're investing in quality and a sense of place and community right from the start, then that makes the conversation easier with existing communities. A great example of that is at Otterpool, where they've been having conversations for years with existing communities. There's 5 parish councils, and when it came to the planning committee, there was very few objections, because people understood what Otterpool and the council were trying to achieve there.
And then Abby, would you agree? Are you advising your clients to put a stewardship plan in place at the outset?
Definitely. I found in my role the inception of stewardship has to come from the landowner themselves. It has to be their prerogative that this is important to them. It goes back to the first episode where we were talking about what is stewardship, and that custodian, that sense of a landowner feeling like a custodian over the bare land that they've decided that they're going to release. This is a big decision usually for them. It can be a once-in-a-lifetime decision, so we can't ever forget that, and it can certainly change their lives as well and their families' lives for generations to come. So it certainly has to drive their decision to promote the land in a certain way, and that then informs our role in terms of advising them how they select the correct delivery partner, for example, if that's the route they decide to go down. Mm-hmm. The delivery partner should share in their objectives, they should be aligned in terms of what they're trying to achieve with the stewardship goals, but that aspiration for a high quality, usually a long-term vision is really important, and usually comes from that partnership approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we're all pretty much agreed it should be early on that you're thinking about stewardship, planning for stewardship, and being flexible. So what are the actual effects of good stewardship? So what are the results when you put that plan in early? I'll come to Anna first.
It's a really tough question, actually, because you never really know until you're building it out. I think from experience, good stewardship probably means less resistance when it comes to development. You know, done well, if you can bring people along with you, both in terms of the existing communities and those emerging and the ones you're trying to nurture. You know, if you deliver something that's accepted and wanted, I think that means you have a chance of doing it with less resistance. I mean, we've not talked about it yet, but, you know, the planning process is painful. And I think part of that is we do have this culture of not wanting development, you know, not in my backyard, it's not what I want. I'm not getting anything. And I think if you can take a different approach to development where, like Sal says, you are bringing everybody along with you, you change the conversation of development on a much bigger scale.
And Sally, anything to add to that?
Absolutely, and social value is so important, and if you get it right, then I think not only will developers see potentially greater value in their homes, but the speed of sales is faster, so your return on investment should be quicker if you get that placemaking stewardship piece right. And in terms of social value, you know, absolutely, it's another great example again about how to do that and measure it well and invest in the local economy, so that, you know, your landscape company managing the landscaping off from the community, the wider community, and that creates jobs, it creates economic vitality, and that's a whole across the piece. Good investment reduces crime, well designed spaces, places design crime out. All of these things make for a good community and good stewardship and placemaking in the long term.
Yeah, so lots of good effects there. I suppose leading on from that and coming on to value, probably a question for Abby first. Would you say that there's a placemaking premium that's attached to stewardship and making wonderful places? Anna and I were at the Building Garden Communities Conference, and I think it was Lord Taylor said that there was a 15% uplift in value. Is that something that you've seen?
Yes, as we've heard and as SallyAnne has alluded to, social value is just one of the measures of value, but there are a whole myriad of other value metrics that are now becoming more recognised, which I think is really interesting. Environmental value, community value, but obviously financial value is still extremely important for landowner and developer decisions. We've all heard of the placemaking premium, like you've alluded to, and initial research by Savills that was undertaken a few years ago did demonstrate there was about a 25% uplift in value. So I think that this uplift in value can be achieved by the early delivery of infrastructure and placemaking principles that are delivered within these high quality schemes. But there are also now other terms, not just placemaking premium, that are being discussed, such as place potential and the halo effects of good placemaking and stewardship for entire neighbourhoods, which I think is also quite an interesting concept.
Okay.
But what's exciting and reassuring is the industry is recognising and quantifying the values. I think that's really important, and evidence is certainly accumulating. I think the data-driven side of things is really important to justify the decisions, but it's certainly becoming more of a priority.
Yeah.
I think one of the things this is giving is a bit more confidence. So when you started that answer, I think you kind of said yes, as if it was going to be yes, but it went on to think, well, actually, there is something in this, because, of course, after everything that happened last year with the housing market and mortgages and all of that, people need confidence. So if you're giving people the confidence buying into a place that it is going to be well run and it is going to look as good as it looks when they first buy a house, that's really important. It's then also giving developers the confidence that there will be money there to pay for things, because, as we've talked about a bit already, fundamentally here it's about how do we pay for things. And from a kind of council position or public sector more broadly, it's also giving confidence that the new approach that's being put in place is going to be one that's going to have legs and is going to work. So when we're saying it brings more value, yeah, on the one hand, good. If it brings that kind of premium to it, and then people want to buy into that. But across the piece, this is just giving us more confidence that we can proceed in a way, because as we keep saying, things are changing and they're not going to be quite the same as we think they might have been, whatever they actually were like.
I wonder if I can ask Abby just to delve into that a little bit more in terms of value. We talked about access to money and delivery being a key part of building that confidence and that relationship with communities. At what point do you start to see value realised, Abby? Is it quite early on in the development? Do people have to wait for it? And are there any kind of challenges that actually a stewardship approach can bring in terms of cash flow and money and that sort of thing?
It's a question that we ask ourselves a lot internally at Savills. We discuss it with our research team, we discuss it within our land teams, but also with our new homes teams as well, because I think we are seeing value uplift achieved early in the process. So once the land is sold to a delivery partner, to a house builder, a developer, for example, at that stage the value is realised, the uplift in value is realised for the landowner, and therefore they have the confidence, like Paul alluded to, in terms of their approach, especially if they're a longer term, patient, capital type landowner, to really stay in the process and buy into that. We are seeing evidence now become available that the value is being realised at the end of the projects, as in when the houses are built and sold, and the green premiums we talk about, the placemaking premiums, etc., that we're talking about. There is evidence out there to show that it's now being realised for certain house builders and developers.
Do you think there's also, Paul, maybe an element of de-risking it to a certain extent once you do have that confidence? So on sort of the larger scale garden communities that Urban&Civic works on, I think one of the nice things that I've seen is the range of house builders that you can start to engage with. So rather than development being for people with a lot of money, by having a more patient capital master developer role, do you start to see more variety of house builders that can start to come on? Is that something that you
I think it is. I think one of the things we're all trying to do, particularly when you've got these large sites, is that variety of offer, if I call it that, is really useful. And particularly when you're trying to create new communities around ones that are really well established, like where we're sitting today in Cambridge. So around Cambridge, where you've got growth on the edge of Cambridge, and then you've got a couple of new towns that are just sort of a bit further out. Then having that variety of offer becomes really important. There's a bit as well about you're not going to get planning permission these days without a really strong approach to stewardship. So that goes to, again, it's written into what we're doing now. We talked a bit about the planning process and kind of, of course, everybody has got ideas about how you could improve that. But we need to be showing in a way that people agree with. So there has to be this agreement between what a developer's suggesting and what planning committee or local councillors or whoever understand by that allows you to do that. So you're not going to get your planning permission now without having something really strong in place.
I think that comes back to councils, local plans, policy, being really clear about what they expect from developers, landowners in terms of stewardship at that local plan policy stage, so that the developers know what they're responding to. You know, what's the minimum, what's the aspiration, scale of development, what they expect on, 1 to 10 houses versus 1,000 up.
And this, I think this goes to my point a bit about nobody's got the monopoly on understanding this better than anybody else right now. So I always worry a little bit when it feels like one particular party is going off and trying to say, well, here's how we're going to do this, and then coming back and telling somebody else, well, this is what we want to do. And on a bad day, and I say this I got my 16 years in local government before I kind of shifted into the private sector. On a bad day, the public sector is really good at saying, I don't want to do that, but I'm now going to tell you exactly how you're going to do it. And if we're not careful, that stifles the ideas coming out, because then the private sector is able to say, well, if you do want me to do that, here are the things that we need to think about.
If that's where it came across, that wasn't what I meant. What I meant is that the local authorities through local plans need to set the benchmark, but they need to leave flexibility for developers to respond to and for innovation to come through. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, what's the end of the journey? Because we're talking about value from the sort of landowner, master developer perspective. And for that you need control, essentially, to make sure you get the value you're expecting. But at the end of the journey, well, the houses are built and that value has been achieved. What is the plan? What happens next? And is there a shift in control? And how is that curated? And I think that's, I'm sitting there sort of thinking about that perspective, which is really long term, as we're talking 10, 15, even 20 years for new places. But at the end, there's a transition that has to happen.
The two bits, just really briefly for me. One is, it might help to separate that out into a financial sort of long-term view and what I keep calling governance, which I think is part of stewardship, which is, who makes decisions, how is it democratically accountable, Francis, like you said in the last episode. So as you stretch out and you look ahead with developments, particularly when you've got a service charge in place, which is something that is really important as to how these things might happen, there's a point at which ideally you get to a position where you achieve a steady state, and then actually you can be starting to bring in more income than the costs of delivering these things. Mm-hmm. And at that point the conversation will change again, because you're then in the position that you can say, well, now we can start to invest properly in making sure that this does have a real financial sort of sustainability. And then the other bit for me is that bit about governance. So how do you grow something that can then take ownership itself and will allow you to move from that, it just feels like it's a man-co, cutting the grass, that kind of top-down approach.
It surely has to be a community-led approach. You need them to want to take responsibility, have that feeling of ownership over a place, and therefore create this self-sustaining economy, community place that will enhance all aspects in terms of their lifestyle. It will create or curate its own economic vitality of a place, and therefore be sustainable in the longer term future. But it really should be that community led, and it should empower the community to take on that role
and through the lifetime of the development. So we mustn't create this cliff edge where developer walks away and is sat on a board quite comfortably for 5, 10, 15 years, and then suddenly the community are left in control and they don't know what they're doing, because that's where things fail. Not necessarily catastrophically fail and a company comes to an end, but residents don't understand their role. They haven't got the skills, expertise to be able to take on the responsibilities. And for me, there's something about, we generally understand that developers will walk away, but other members of the community who do understand building community, whether it's local authorities or community organisations, they need a place on that board as well to support the residents. It's a really big thing.
Yeah, I think that cliff edge point is a really powerful one, Sal. And talking about governance, the structures that you can put on or put in place at the very outset of a development as the community emerges, and Sally, you've got a lot of experience in this, it's about not necessarily giving ownership to an emerging community that's inexperienced, probably a little bit scared, a little bit naive at the very outset, but having that initial custodian, setting up responsible and responsive governance structures. That kind of part, that emerging and nurturing community, is an education process, it's a maturing process. Listening, getting them involved, bringing the right expert in at the right time, so at the point the developer is comfortable to say, do you know what, now is my time to exit. That new custodian for the in perpetuity place has almost presented itself, because you've brought them along with you, rather than South as this traditional kind of build out and, excuse the language, bugger off phrase, and then just hand it over at a point where people don't know what it is and how to deal with it.
We're talking as if there is just one entity when we're talking about stewardship, which is, of course, easier conceptually to talk about. But is that really the case in what we're talking about?
I think for me, during the lifespan of building out, in our experience, having a coherent vision is important. So that curation of place we're talking about, for me, it is about somebody bringing it together. But there are not even one community. Communities even in and of themselves have a lot of tensions within them. But I think it's very hard to deliver without a linchpin, a coherent element to it.
One driving force.
If we're talking about scale, large communities, then you will naturally get various resident forums, scout groups, gardening groups. As Anna said, there's communities within communities, isn't there? But for us, from a stewardship kind of perspective, having one landowner of the community assets is really important, because then in the long term you've got one organisation who's holding the vision, and it doesn't matter whether they manage those facilities. So you might have a leisure centre that you bring a leisure trust into, and a village hall that's got the parish council running it. It can be a whole multitude of operators, but what you've got is a stewardship body that is driving that direction of place.
Well, thanks everyone. I was actually going to have a final question of how the stewardship approach can add value, but I really think we've covered it all there. So thanks for that. I think we're all in agreement that having stewardship early on, but also throughout, and certainly in the planning, because you're just not going to get a planning permission if you don't give some thought to it. And it's not just about those capital values, it's about the social value as well. So I think we have wrapped that up really nicely and justified why you need stewardship very high on your agenda. So thanks again to my guests for joining me here today. And our next episode and last episode will be, now we've set out the why and the what of stewardship, will be how we deliver successful stewardship.